And this leads to our next big story, which is Trump is probably going to be broke. I don't know that he can cover this 83.3 million. And as we said before, he's got to issue a bond. And what creditor is going to give him a bond? Which means he's going to have to pay it in cash. He's going to have to put 83.3 million in cash somewhere in a bond. And Michael Popok's going to cover this, but it's actually worse for Trump than you think. But we're going to go back to Michael Popok covering this on Trump, because this is all kind of interconnected and it's all craziness.
Legal AF. By my calculation, Donald Trump will be out of all of his cash after he pays the judgments and verdicts just this week in the two civil cases brought by E. Jean Carroll and the New York Attorney General. What's that, you say? Isn't he a $3 billionaire, Popok? Well, I know the Bloomberg Index likes to talk about it that way. But of that amount, most of it, I would say 90% of it, 85% of it is tied up in real estate and other revenue-producing assets. Cash on hand, according to Donald Trump in his own deposition that he gave about a year ago to the New York Attorney General, he's got just $400 million in cash. That's a lot of money to you and me, but not a lot of money for somebody that's about to face up to $600 million in judgments and verdicts. Let me do the math and expose something else that came out in.
So let me help you out. I'll do the math for you real quick. He does a good job, but it's better from a finance person. So Trump claims he has.
All right, so math it up for us.
Mathing it up, baby. We're gonna do some billionaire budgeting. All right. So he claims he has 400 million, which is probably untrue. It's probably a lot less than that, but let's assume. So it was at 6 or 7 million from the first E. Jean Carroll case that he owes, plus 83 million on this new one. So that's 90 million he's got to come up with quick. Right? On top of that, the New York civil fraud trial, and Goran's supposed to give a ruling sometime this week. And Letitia James, who is the district attorney, asked for 370 million. And Trump would no longer be allowed to do any business in New York. All of his business licenses would be pulled, and his sons would probably lose their business licenses for at least 4 or 5 years. Well, what happened was, we'll get to that here in a second. So that's all looking good. But the thing about it is most attorneys are guessing now that it might be that Goran goes as high as 500 million or more. So that would be 600 million he'd owe. So he's 200 million in the hole. And we also know that he's trying to right now sell a plane and an apartment complex somewhere. And he's been trying to do it quietly under the table because he needs the cash because he's broke. And he's already tried to go to his campaign and ask them to help him pay for it. But they've said, we can't do that. That's illegal. And so many of his campaign funds have been shut down for fraud like that, which is why he's getting sued he's going to get charged by Stormy Daniels and get sued by her and all that. And that's a criminal charge because what he did was to pay her off. He took the money from the campaign to pay her off, which you can't do. I can't take money from my business or from like a campaign fund where people donated money and use it on personal shit. You can't mingle your funds like that because it's fraud. It's tax fraud. So that was going on. So this whole thing now, it looks like he's tanked financially. He might be broke, and New York will probably have to start seizing properties. That's not to also mention the fact that the estimate right now is he's paying anywhere between $5 to $10 million a month in legal fees, and he's got 91 felony indictments. Of the 4 indictments, and he hasn't even been to criminal court yet. It looks like they pushed back the March one for the January 6th one for the federal case, the DC case, but that looks like that's going to go through in April. So his legal fees are going to go up then. Then he's got the Stormy Daniel one, which could kind of go whenever. They're just waiting for a time frame to figure this out. And then he's going to have to go to court in Georgia for the RICO case. I mean, and then on top of that, he's also right now in the process of being sued by several senators and congressmen for January 6th because he put their lives in danger. Several cops that were injured during January 6th, including the family of the one cop, a couple of cops that died in the aftermath of that. And I mean, and then there's like a dozen other people suing him. I mean, so plus he's paying almost $10 million a month in legal fees. That's $120 million a year just to cover his legal fees. Plus, Rudy Giuliani is fucking broke, and Rudy Giuliani is trying to sue him now for all his back legal fees that Trump never paid him.
Oh,
it's like you just like
snap.
How much more manure can we throw onto this pile, man?
Well, tune in next week, kids.
Well, Trump, if you want my legal advice, quit breaking the law, asshole. That's my legal advice. Oh man,
Feels pretty safe to give that advice.
Oh, I got to tell you, it's like the guy picks the wrong answer every time. If you asked him what his favorite color was, he'd be like Hitler. That's not what I asked, but okay. So here's what happened. So
Like, that's funny the question.
Oh man, so the New York fraud case, which is also going to be a lot of fun when we get the verdict on that. So this Friday, the independent investigator, right, did the financial report. And so she's a judge, and Trump and his lawyers agreed to it. The judge agreed to it, and the prosecutor agreed that this woman would monitor his business and his financials to make sure he was in compliance. She gave him an F on her report card, basically saying that no, there's still inconsistencies. Furthermore, they changed what they were doing when she got there, which is really suspicious. And we're going to watch some more Michael Popak where he talks about this, because this is just, I know we're stealing from the Midas Touch so much today, but they covered this really well.
After dark this coming week, the hits just keep on coming for Donald Trump on the heels of an $83.5 million jury verdict. We're waiting on a $500 million plus judgment against him by Judge Engoron in the New York State Supreme Court for the New York Attorney General's civil fraud case against Donald Trump and all his little Trumper executives with his last name. We'll break down what we think is going to happen and what were the most recent bad facts and bad acts by Donald Trump that will be used by the judge against him in the resulting order. We break it all down one place on Midas Touch, on Legal AF, and here's a clip.
We expect next week that Justice Arthur Engoron is going to issue his order. The New York State Court judge, Justice Arthur Engoron, will issue his order.
So this is back to the point I was making before, where they're saying from all the attorneys they've talked to, it looks like they're looking at $500 million, $500 million. So, I mean, this is just really, really bad for Trump. Let me skip ahead. Sorry, folks. I thought I had this prep, but here we go.
We've got good news that we can report right on target, right about what Ben said to start the podcast. Judge Engoron is going to be issuing his order on Wednesday, the court has announced, of this week. Just as we said, waiting for the results of the jury, the federal jury, the E. Jean Carroll case, and waiting for this report that we're going over in detail by former Judge Barbara Jones. Judge Engoron is ready to I'm sure, as I said earlier in my analysis weeks ago, that he had most of that order written at the time of the closing arguments a couple of weeks ago. That went terribly for Chris Keiss, the lawyer for Donald Trump, and was just waiting to see if there was anything that he had missed in 11 weeks of trial, analyzed. Would be a 15, 20, 25, whatever page single space.
So he's pretty much written it. He was just waiting for the report. We'll skip ahead here. Lawrence O'Donnell's going to cover and basically just sort of reiterate what we've been talking about. But this was on Lawrence O'Donnell the other day. And I'm pissed that he beat us to it because I was writing this and then I saw him do it the next day.
Well, E. Jean Carroll has sent Donald Trump on his way to bankruptcy. with the $90 million that he now owes E. Jean Carroll as of tonight. That's $83.3 million in a jury return for E. Jean Carroll on Friday, added to the $5.6 million that a jury returned for E. Jean Carroll in the same courtroom last year, and with interest running on both of those judgments. Interest. Remember the interest that everyone else has forgotten about. Donald Trump is already around $90 million in debt to E. Jean Carroll. And that debt increases every single day that it is not paid because of the interest added by law to that amount every day that it remains unpaid. And that could be the smallest debt that Donald Trump owes after a New York judge enters a judgment in a civil fraud case against Donald Trump, in which the New York State Attorney General is seeking $370 million. And that's not all. Don't stop there. There are much bigger possible judgments coming. Washington, D.C. juries could make that New York number look small if they return verdicts against Donald Trump in the civil cases brought against him by 11 members of the House of Representatives. That's 11 plaintiffs who are suing Donald Trump for, in effect, threatening their lives on January 6th by sending his mob to the Capitol. There are also 3 police officers who are suing Donald Trump for the threats and injuries that they suffered on January 6th. Each one of those plaintiffs' cases, each one of them could be getting hundreds of millions of dollars in the same Washington, D.C. courthouse where a civil jury returned a verdict of $148 million against Rudolph Giuliani for the defamation of 2 Georgia election workers, Ruby Freeman and her daughter, Shay Moss. Donald Trump could be facing court orders to pay $1 billion or more in the next few years.
$1 billion. And legal fees and fines and penalties.
Wow.
And he doesn't have it. He might have it if you sell his properties, but then he can't do any more business. And even then, when you factor this in, they figure roughly from all of his properties, his income per year is about maybe $60 million. But that's not going to nearly cover any of this. And if he's going to start selling properties, his income is going to go down because he's no longer going to be getting income from those properties. And he's not going to get equity because it's all going to go back to the court or back to the people that he owes.
Doug, and I literally don't know this because it hasn't come up in my world, I guess, fortunately.
Yeah.
Can you bankrupt something like that? Like these
legal fines?
Court fine? Yeah.
No, he's going to owe it.
So they're like student loan. You're gonna be stuck with them. They're like student loans, taxes. You can't get rid of those.
No, like the worst case scenario, I guess, for the victims would be, they just have. I mean, let's say he's totally broke. They just start garnishing a portion of his money going forward. But if he owns businesses, they can liquidate those. They can seize those. So the only thing that they could garnish is if he had income from labor. Somebody was paying him a paycheck, which isn't going to happen. He's never done that. He's never gotten a paycheck before. He always gets paid from shit he owns.
Right.
So they're going to start seizing all that. So he might be flat on his ass here in a year or two. And in all likelihood, he'll probably be in prison by then anyway. So this is really bad. I mean, this is what the end looks like. Looks like he could die broken in prison. That's a very likely possibility at this point. And the big thing about the E. Jean Carroll case, which isn't getting overlooked, but I think is really overlooked by a lot of the right-wing pundits and stuff, is that $83.3 million, that big of a fine, the damages that he had to pay. Basically, that's a green light to all the other courts. Because now if you don't hammer him when he's guilty, you look like a chicken shit. Because that jury wasn't afraid to do it. And that was 9 random people.
Right.
Right. And the judge was not afraid to back them up. So now if you're the court that doesn't hammer him and he's guilty, after you find him guilty, then you look really bad. You look like you're a shill, like you're in the pocket of, right? So, I mean, it basically, that's why it's such a big deal, is this opened the floodgate to go after him for all of his criminal activities, all of his unlawful fraud, all the shit he's been doing. And and even the report that the judge did for Angoran, she found that one, they changed their financial practices when she started monitoring them, which means they knew what they were doing was wrong. And once they had a monitor there, right, a proctor showed up, right, the teacher's now standing behind you, making sure you're not cheating, then they changed what they were doing. But then what they were still doing stuff that was not normal, as she puts it, or unusual, or there were lots of discrepancies, which is a nice way of saying they were still committing fraud. They just sort of changed how they did it to try and sneak it past me. And then she found that he took a loan that he never repaid that doesn't make any sense, which means he basically just took money out of his business so he wouldn't have to pay tax on it. Plus, he had some parking lot scam where he took $50 million out of that. I mean, it's all this weird shit. So he's going to get hammered. I don't see Judge Engoron coming back for less than $370 million. It's going to be bad. But